This film is based on a famous self-help book named The Secret by Rhonda Byrne, which basically focuses on appreciating the good things in life. It helps people realize the power of positive thinking and encourages them to always consider life to be a miracle. Moving forward, the movie begins in a small town which seems to have been affected drastically by a hurricane. Houses and boats appear to be wrecked because of the massive storm. In such tough times, the citizens of this town gather together and help each other repair their properties. Furthermore, they also strive to provide food and other supplies to the ones in need. The scene now shifts to a middle-aged woman named Miranda Wells shopping for fish at a nearby dock. With warnings of the hurricane appearing everywhere, she tries to work as fast as possible to avoid any unfortunate circumstances. She bargains with the fisherman and grabs whatever she can before warning him to stay safe in the waters. Concerned, she asks him to remain alert during the hurricane. She then goes over to a seafood restaurant, where she sells all the fish and crabs. Shortly after, Miranda completes all her chores and heads over to her boyfriend's office. It turns out that her boyfriend, Tucker, actually owns the entire restaurant, and Miranda simply works for him. While at the office, Miranda tells her boyfriend that she's heading out for a dentist appointment. Upon hearing this, Tucker asks her to stay safe and very hesitantly tells her that he wants to postpone their date night. He goes on to explain that since the hurricane is approaching their area, he has to stay back at the restaurant and make sure that the place remains safe and sturdy. Thankfully, Miranda understands the situation and happily kisses him before walking out. The scene now shifts to a young man named Bray Johnson checking into a hotel. Immediately after walking in, he is greeted by the receptionist, who quickly hands him his room keys. The two chat for quite a while and get to know more about each other. In the meantime, Miranda reaches her dentist's office and gets her teeth checked. After her initial checkup, she is informed that she has some large cavities which will need a root canal. Upon hearing this, Miranda is shocked, as she doesn't have enough funds to continue with the procedure. Since she's paying out of pocket, she would have to spend thousands of dollars for the root canal. With no other option left, she even considers asking Tucker for help, but soon opts out of it. Now frustrated, Miranda eventually drives away, whilst trying to come up with a solution to her problem. At the same time, Bray drives around the area and ends up arriving at Miranda's house. There, he runs into her son, Greg, who informs him that she is still at work. Needless to say, he is disappointed to hear this. It turns out that he has an envelope that he wants to give to Miranda. Since there's no other option left, Greg tries to take the envelope on behalf of his mother, but Bray stops him, asserting that the document requires a lot of explanation. Shortly after, he bids Greg goodbye and quietly drives away. Meanwhile, Miranda goes to pick her daughters up from school whilst intently listening to the news. At one point, she gets a call from her mother-in-law, Bobby, who asks her to stay safe. Concerned, the latter explains that the hurricane is going to be very deadly, and it could potentially cause a lot of damage. In response, Miranda simply smiles and says that she's doing everything to keep her family safe. That's when Bobby asks her if she has fixed the leaks on her roof. Miranda quietly replies that she hasn't, and goes on to say that she can't even afford a root canal treatment at the moment. Shortly after, she hangs up the call and continues to wait for her children. Sadly, it turns out that ever since her husband's passing, Miranda had been struggling a lot to make ends meet. Because of this, she had been working day and night just to take care of her 3 kids. Moving forward, Miranda finally picks up her daughters, Bessie and Missy, from school and proceeds to drive back home. Whilst doing so, Missy sighs in frustration and complains that she hates being poor. She goes on to explain that all her friends get amazing gifts for their birthdays, but she never does. Upon hearing this, Miranda tries to comfort her daughter, but ends up arguing with her instead. As a result, she gets extremely distracted and crashes into a pickup truck. Now panicking, Miranda runs out of her van and profusely apologizes to the owner, who happens to be none other than Bray. Thankfully, the latter forgives her and offers to fix the minor damage to her van instead. The two don't really introduce themselves to each other, but when Bray follows Miranda home, he realizes who she is. Despite being utterly shocked, Bray stays silent and refrains from handing her the envelope. He decides to give her the document later, and simply proceeds to repair her minivan. Whilst doing so, he officially introduces himself to Miranda, and chats with her for quite some time. Right at that moment, Greg runs up to them and instantly recognizes Bray, but doesn't say anything. Instead, he just helps the latter fix the van. In the meantime, Miranda goes back inside her house and starts preparing dinner. As she continues working on her chores, she listens to the news and learns that the hurricane is getting closer and closer. Now incredibly concerned, she looks out the window and sees Greg and Bray getting along really well. This makes her really happy, as Greg hadn't really recovered after his father's sudden loss. Back at the garage, Greg asks Bray all sorts of questions, since the latter is a mechanical engineer. Bray happily answers all the queries, and even encourages Greg to continue with his passion. It's evident that the two have a lot of similar interests. Just as they finish repairing the car, the weather gets really gloomy. Eventually, it starts raining heavily, so both Bray and Greg run back into the house. Once inside, Miranda offers Bray a beer and politely asks him about his visit. In response, the latter simply smiles and says that it's kind of a long story. Just as the two are chatting, Miranda's younger daughter, Bessie, starts begging for pizza. However, since they can't afford it, Miranda sternly refuses. Shortly after, the weather starts to get really bad, and loud thunderstorms engulf the sky. Because of this, water begins to seep through the roof, so Miranda places pots all over the house. Whilst being extremely embarrassed, she timidly explains to Bray that since she can't afford to fix her roof at the moment, she uses pots to collect the rainwater. Thankfully, Bray understands the situation and instead encourages her family to think positive. Unlike Miranda, Bray seems to have a much brighter outlook on life. He believes that everything happens for a reason, and one should never feel defeated if things don't go according to plan. Just then, a man shows up at Miranda's door and delivers pizza. Surprisingly, it turns out that Tucker ordered it for Miranda's children to enjoy. Needless to say, everyone gets really happy and devours the food. They all chat gleefully. Eventually, the weather starts to get really bad, so Bray bids Miranda and her family goodbye. Right before leaving, he wishes her all the best and asks her to stay strong. In response, Miranda simply thanks Bray and suggests that he go back to his hotel as soon as possible. Bray readily agrees to the suggestion and rushes towards his truck. However, just as he's about to drive away, he grabs the envelope addressed to Miranda and places it inside her mailbox. Since he didn't want to hand it to her in person, placing it inside her letterbox anonymously seems like a great idea to him. Shortly after Bray's departure, Miranda puts all her kids to bed and proceeds to watch the news. It's evident that she's really worried about the hurricane, as her house is already on the brink of irreparable damage. As expected, the storm affects the entire city quite drastically, and even destroys several properties. During midnight, the hurricane gets excessively strong and as a result, a massive tree branch falls inside Miranda's house, ultimately damaging her roof in the process. This causes Miranda to panic, as she has nowhere else to go. Now incredibly distressed, she and all three of her children huddle together in the bathroom. Miranda comforts her kids through the entire night and assures them that they're safe. The very next morning, Miranda gets up and immediately starts to assess the damage. Much to her dismay, she comes to learn that the entire house is flooded, and the kitchen is absolutely wrecked. Moreover, the electricity has also been cut off. Upon seeing this, Greg starts to panic. On the other hand, Bessie starts crying and talks about how their family is unlucky. During all this, Miranda tries her best to keep a straight face. She stays calm and proceeds to clean the mess, just for the sake of her kids. Shortly after, Bray arrives at the house and is shocked to see the state of it. Not only has the house been destroyed, but the mailbox also blew away. Because of this, Miranda never received the envelope. Now incredibly worried, Bray immediately rushes towards the house and checks up on Miranda. Concerned, he asks her if she's okay, to which the latter sadly replies that she isn't. Whilst holding back tears, she claims that her life is just a series of unfortunate events. In response, Bray asks her to stay strong and offers any help that she needs. Moving forward, Bray tries his hardest to cheer Miranda up, but that latter just gets annoyed by him. Frustrated, she asserts that not everyone can always be happy and move on with their life. Upon hearing this, Bray simply smiles and offers to fix the damaged roof. In response, Miranda laughs that repairing such a massive roof isn't so easy. She even goes on to warn Bray that it could be dangerous. However, the latter refuses to back down and begins listing various ways to fix the roof. After realizing that Bray is persistent, Miranda sighs and admits that she has no money. Installing or even fixing the already damaged roof would cost about $10,000. That's when Bray tells Miranda that he can repair the entire roof for about $500. Miranda is initially shocked by this and doesn't believe Bray at all. Eventually, she agrees to the plan and, out of curiosity, asks Bray the reason for his kindness and generosity. In response, Bray tells her that he just has a lot of time on his hands, since he doesn't have to return to his teaching job at Vanderbilt University anytime soon. Even though Miranda is still unsure about Bray's intentions, she decides to stay silent and let him help her. A while later, she goes back inside the house and checks on her kids. Thankfully, all three of them appear to be fine. Now relieved, Miranda and her children try to salvage whatever is left inside the house. However, whilst doing so, Missy sadly asks her mother about her birthday party, which is supposed to happen in 5 days. Frustrated, she claims that they'll not be able to host any kind of event in their house. In response, Miranda comforts Missy and promises that she'll figure something out. This makes Missy really excited. However, just when she's about to discuss her birthday plans, Bray pops out of nowhere and informs Miranda that the damage isn't so bad. Furthermore, he explains that fixing the roof might only cost a couple $100s. Right at that moment, Bobby arrives at the scene and runs up to her grandkids. Scared out of her wits, she hugs all of them tightly and asks if they're all right. Miranda approaches her right then and explains the situation. Just then, Bobby notices Bray walking around the house and inspecting the roof. Miranda explains that Bray is the one who fixed her car, and is now also repairing her broken roof. When Bobby hears this, she gets really queasy and automatically assumes that Bray is trying to steal Miranda from Tucker. Incredibly skeptical, she listens to Greg and Missy gush about him and his positive outlook on life. Shortly after, Bray tells Miranda that he's going to get all the raw materials required. After he's gone, Bobby asks all her grandchildren to come with her, since their school has closed down. Miranda initially refuses to leave her house, but soon agrees, just for the sake of her kids. She quickly urges her children to pack up an emergency bag and prepare for their trip. In the meantime, she discusses her options with Bobby, and even asks the latter to drive by Tucker's restaurant in order to check up on him. Bobby readily agrees to the request, and begs Miranda to hold on to Tucker. Furthermore, she warns Miranda that trusting a stranger blindly might not be such a good idea. In response, Miranda simply smiles, believing that Bray is a good person who just wants to help her. After finally getting everything ready, Miranda and her family pack up and leave for Bobby's house. On their way, they stop by Tucker's restaurant and see that the place is somewhat okay. Miranda immediately gets out of her car and asks Tucker if he needs any help. In response, her boyfriend claims he's doing just fine. He then asks Miranda to take care of her own business first. Needless to say, Miranda agrees to the suggestion and informs Tucker about Bray fixing her damaged roof. Meanwhile, Bobby, who is listening to the entire conversation, urges Miranda to take her relationship to the next step. However, Miranda refuses to do so, as she doesn't want to force anything. In the meantime, Bray finally gets all the instruments required to fix the roof and starts by cleaning up the house. Whilst doing so, he notices a beautiful photo of Miranda and her family celebrating Christmas. He even sees her deceased husband in the picture. The scene now shifts to a flashback where Bray and Miranda's husband, Matt, appear to be hanging out together. The two board a plane and discuss some important matters regarding an invention. It's evident that the two know each other quite well. Thus, when Bray suddenly sees Matt's picture, he becomes overwhelmed with emotions and begins to remember the time they spent together. However, the flashback is soon cut short when he suddenly gets a call from a strange woman. Needless to say, he quickly picks up the call and tells the woman all about his reparation plans. In response, the latter asks him if he gave the envelope to Miranda. Bray calmly replies that he hasn't, and further goes on to explain that something inside him is stopping him from doing so. It's clear that the envelope had a very important document related to Matt. On the other hand, Miranda and her children finally reach Bobby's house. Once there, they all grab their things and begin discussing the fun activities they want to do. At the same time, Tucker finishes repairing his restaurant and drives towards Miranda's house. When he eventually reaches the place, he approaches Bray and asks who he really is. In response, Bray replies that he's just lending a helping hand. Not convinced by the answer, Tucker climbs onto the roof and begins inspecting the damage. Whilst doing so, the two chat about their lives and try their best to get along. At one point, Tucker starts telling Bray about his relationship with Miranda and claims that he's madly in love with her. After some time, Bray clarifies that he has absolutely no romantic intentions towards Miranda and is only doing this to give her hope for a better future. Upon hearing this, Tucker is relieved and prepares to leave. However, before walking away, he urges Bray to ask for help if he ever needs it. The latter happily agrees to the offer and bids him goodbye. Back at Bobby's house, Greg, Missy, and Bessie all get extremely bored. Since the community only consists of elderly people, the three have no friends to play with. Meanwhile, Bobby and Miranda prepare some snacks in the kitchen. Whilst doing so, Bobby suggests Miranda just sell her house and buy a new one. However, she instantly turns down the offer, since she doesn't have enough funds to do so. Plus, no one would be willing to spend a fortune on her already damaged house. Later that day, Bray calls Miranda and informs her that he'll be done in a day or two. Upon hearing this, the latter gets really excited and thanks him for his hard work. But midway through, she stops herself and starts venting about her problems. Incredibly frustrated, she tells Bray that she's worried about her children's future and admits that she's planning to sell the house. Bray is shocked by the news, but tries his best to stay calm. Not knowing what to say, he asks her to keep her head high and wait for what the future has to offer. He reveals that he learned all this only after his wife cheated on him. It turns out that 10 years ago, he had to go through a very rough divorce, which left him hopeless and angry. However, he soon received a wake-up call which completely changed his outlook on life. When Miranda hears all this, she is shocked, but also impressed by his positivity. After learning all about Bray's life, she starts to get hopeful about her own future. The very next morning, Bray extends his stay in the city and asks his hotel manager to keep an eye out for an important package. Meanwhile, Miranda, Bobby, and Bessie go to Tucker's restaurant and pack up several food items to give to the needy. When Tucker learns about this, he immediately begins to help them. At that moment, Bobby informs him about Miranda's decision to sell her house. Needless to say, Tucker is incredibly shocked by this. Confused, he asks Miranda about this hasty decision. But she just wonders about what other option she has. Seeing this, Tucker backs away. He walks out of the restaurant whilst Miranda and her family continue packing up the necessary food items. Later that night, Miranda gets overwhelmed by everything going on in her life and breaks down. She sobs quietly through the entire night, with no one to comfort her. The very next morning, Bray finishes repairing the roof. Back at Bobby's house, all three of Miranda's children begin missing their home terribly. Thankfully, Miranda receives a message from Bray stating that her house is now fully fixed. Upon seeing this, she cheers in excitement and asks her kids to pack their bags. Bobby isn't so happy to see them go, but sadly, she has no other choice. She drives them back to the house and asks Miranda to take care of herself. Much to her surprise, the roof appears to be a lot better than before. Greg and Missy also love their new roof. Shortly after, Miranda goes to get her checkbook, whilst Missy and Bessie run back to their respective rooms. Greg then takes this opportunity to ask Bray about the envelope. In response, the latter explains that he had to get a new one, because the previous envelope blew away in the hurricane. Eventually, he bids Greg goodbye and walks out of the house. Just as he's about to drive away, Miranda approaches him and hands him a check of $500. Bray happily takes it and wishes her the best in life. She then tries to ask him the reason for his utmost generosity, but the latter just changes the topic. Soon, the two begin chatting about various other things. When Bobby witnesses this, she isn't too happy and tries to get Miranda away from Bray. Thankfully, Bray notices this and leaves immediately. Later that day, Miranda and her entire family go to Tucker's restaurant for its reopening. There, Tucker thanks all of his staff for working really hard. He then takes this opportunity to get down on his knees and propose to Miranda. The latter is clearly shocked by this and doesn't know how to respond. Even her children seem displeased by the situation. But since Tucker loves her a lot and will prove to be an excellent partner, Miranda agrees and gets engaged. Bobby is elated by this and heartily congratulates the couple. Shortly after, she offers to look after the children whilst Miranda and Tucker go out to celebrate their engagement. Miranda isn't quite sure about the idea, but agrees nonetheless. Eventually, Bobby and the kids leave, whereas Miranda and Tucker go out to celebrate their engagement. The very next morning, Tucker surprises Miranda with a brand new car. Clearly stunned, the latter refuses to accept such an expensive gift. However, Tucker doesn't budge and asserts that his fiancée shouldn't be driving around in a minivan. Soon after, she proceeds to leave in order to get things ready for Missy's upcoming birthday party. Since Missy is already stressed about everything going on in her life, Miranda wants the party to be absolutely flawless. Upon realizing this, Tucker tries to help her, but she simply refuses. On the other hand, Bray returns back to Miranda's place and proceeds to take care of the rest of the damage around the house. Whilst doing so, he sees Greg kicking things around. It's evident that he is distraught about something. Greg initially refuses to speak about it. However, he soon starts venting about how his life just isn't the same anymore. Frustrated, he asserts that he misses his dad a lot and doesn't want anyone else to take his place. He even goes as far as to say that Miranda shouldn't marry Tucker because she doesn't love him. Upon hearing this, Bray gets really confused and asks Greg why he thinks so. He replies that Miranda has never loved anyone as much as Matt. After talking for a long while, Bray asks Greg to understand that his father loved him a lot and would want him to be happy. Shortly after, Bray finishes all his chores and proceeds to head back home. But just when he's about to leave, Missy approaches him and hands him a drink. She then asks him the reason for his helpfulness. While sighing, she tells Bray that one of her friends is celebrating their birthday party on the same day as her. Since her friend is going to hire food trucks, nobody is going to attend her party. After hearing all this, Bray asks Missy if her best friends are going to attend the celebration. If so, she should spend time with them and do what makes her happy. He even gives her various tips and tricks to make the party a lot more fun. This helps Missy to develop a whole new attitude towards her upcoming birthday party. She profusely thanks Bray for his suggestions and positive attitude. Now more excited than ever, she invites him to her birthday celebration. Bray initially tries to refuse, but agrees at her insistence. Right at that moment, Miranda returns home in her brand new car, which leaves everyone stunned. Bray then quickly takes this opportunity to congratulate Miranda for the engagement and wishes her all the best for the future. Miranda just smiles uneasily. It's evident that she's still unsure about her engagement with Tucker. After a short conversation, Bray finally packs up his stuff and proceeds to leave. However, Miranda stops him abruptly and with a frustrated sigh, claims that her life is still as miserable as before. She further goes on to explain that even though most of her problems have been solved, there's still a part of her that's not happy. Upon hearing this, Bray tries to comfort her. However, Miranda begins to get a lot more fidgety and doesn't listen to a word he says. Instead, she just begs him to come to Missy's birthday party. In the meantime, Miranda finally goes back into her house and happily approaches Bobby. With a big smile on her face, she shows off her engagement ring. Bobby asks Miranda to cherish her relationship, because not many men would want to marry a woman with such baggage. This comment really hurts Miranda, but she just brushes it off and decides to look on the bright side of things, just like Bray would. Later that day, Miranda goes back to work and as usual, starts collecting different types of fish for the restaurant. Whilst doing so, she tells Tucker all about Missy's birthday party and invites him to the celebration. However, when he learns that Bray is coming along too, he gets slightly irritated. With a frustrated sigh, he tells Miranda that Bray's proximity towards her is very weird. Miranda defends her choice to invite him. This really infuriates Tucker, so he starts accusing Bray of trying to insert himself into Miranda's family. Things quickly escalate from there, which ultimately ends with Miranda berating Tucker for being so childish and ridiculous. On the other hand, Bray, who has now finally finished helping Miranda, returns to his hotel. Once there, he thinks back to the day of the plane crash. It turns out that about 5 years ago, Bray got into a very deadly accident. His plane crashed into the middle of nowhere, ultimately leaving him stranded in an ice-cold area. Despite being severely injured, Bray somehow managed to take care of himself until the rescue team arrived. Moving forward, whilst Bray continues thinking about the past, the hotel receptionist hands him a brand new copy of Miranda's document. Bray happily takes the papers and neatly places it inside an envelope. At that moment, he gets a text from Miranda stating that the party starts at 2. With not much time left, he rushes over to her place and helps her set up the ambience. Soon enough, Missy's friends arrive at the party. The celebration finally begins and everyone ends up having a great time. Bessie, Missy, and all her friends have loads of fun making taffy and chatting about anything and everything. In the meantime, Tucker and Miranda happily watch the kids, whilst also making sure that the party continues smoothly. Just then, Bobby arrives at the scene and anxiously calls out to Miranda. Now concerned, she immediately rushes back inside the house. Bobby hands Miranda an article that clearly has Matt's invention idea written on it. Upon seeing this, Miranda sighs that the idea is probably someone else's, and just similar to the one that Matt came up with. However, Bobby refuses to believe it, and claims that someone has stolen Matt's idea and passed it off as their own. It turns out that Miranda's husband, Matt, was an exceptional genius, who always came up with new projects on sustainability. At one point, he had even come up with a great idea on saving energy. Since this could be really important for the development of sustainable power, Matt wanted to place a patent on it. But unfortunately, he got into a plane crash right beforehand, which ended up taking his life. Moving forward, Miranda and Bobby continue arguing about the project. Eventually, Miranda gives up and begs Bobby to just drop the conversation. However, that's when the latter shows her another article about Bray claiming the idea as his own. Needless to say, Miranda is shocked. Now more confused than ever, she confronts Bray about the project. Furious, she asks him if ever knew Matt. However, before he can ever answer the question or even explain the situation, Miranda slaps him hard across the face and accuses him of stealing her husband's idea. Bray tries his hardest to defend himself, but Miranda simply refuses to listen. After begging for a long time, Bray finally explains that he and Matt actually merged their ideas. It turns out that the two were in the same engineering convention a couple years ago. During this time, Matt told Bray all about his idea on saving energy. The latter was thoroughly impressed by it, and in an attempt to improve the idea, he even suggested some minor changes, which Matt happily approved. Eventually, the two decided to integrate their projects. They then got on a plane in order to meet some big investors. However, the plane ended up crashing horrendously, which resulted in Matt losing his life. After hearing all this, Miranda breaks down and asks Bray the real reason for his help. In response, he explains that the patent for the project finally cleared a month ago, so he just wanted to hand it over to her. However, when he came over to give her the envelope, he saw the condition she was in. This caused him to feel extremely guilty, so he decided to help her in any way he could. Upon learning this, Miranda is completely shattered. Heartbroken, she asks him to leave. That very night, Bray packs up his bag and returns to Tennessee. However, before leaving, he sends the envelope with the patent to Miranda's address. The following morning, Miranda receives the envelope and also comes to learn that Bray has already left town. When she finally opens the patent, she realizes that Bray never stole Matt's idea. In fact, he has done the opposite and given Matt the recognition he needs. Furthermore, Miranda sees that the patent has come with a large paycheck that is almost the same amount as her debt. Now incredibly shocked and relieved, she goes up to her kids and informs them about the patent. She goes on to explain that she's very proud of Matt, as he managed to take care of his family before passing away. Overjoyed, she also reveals that the paycheck is the first of many to come. After thoroughly discussing the patent, Miranda shifts the topic to Tucker and asks her children if they're happy with the engagement. She explains that she was caught off guard during the engagement, and since she didn't want to create a scene, there was no other choice but to accept the proposal. Since she's had time to think about it, she wants to ask them about their opinion as well. All three of her children express that she probably shouldn't marry Tucker. Greg even expresses that she doesn't love him the way she loved Matt, and marrying him would only be out of convenience. Now with a whole new opportunity ahead of them, Miranda and her kids celebrate Matt's success and have a great time. They roam around the city and somehow end up finding their old mailbox. When Miranda opens it up, she finds an envelope inside. She even comes across a small note from Bray that expresses his regret for not revealing who he really was when he first met her. Furthermore, the note also claims that Matt was a brilliant man who loved his family dearly. Upon reading the entire note in the envelope, Miranda finally realizes that Bray really had only ever tried to help her. Later that night, while Miranda is taking care of the chores, Missy approaches her and asks her to forgive Bray. he changed their lives for the better. Upon hearing this, Miranda finally realizes her true feelings for Bray. With no time to waste, she goes to meet Tucker and calls off the engagement. She even returns the car gifted by him and profusely apologizes for hurting him. Despite being heartbroken, Tucker stays calm and sadly accepts the situation. With a heavy heart, he wishes Miranda all the best in life. The latter thanks him for his understanding and goes on to resign from her job. Shortly after, Miranda rushes over to Bobby's place and explains the entire situation to her. She explains that despite perfecting the whole project by himself, Bray decided to name Matt as the co-owner of the patent. She then informs Bobby that she has called off the engagement with Tucker because she just didn't love him. She has decided to go back to nursing school and continue on with her life. Despite her initial hesitance, Bobby fully supports Miranda in her endeavors and wishes her all the best for the future. The very next day, Miranda goes to Tennessee to meet Bray. However, when she finally reaches the place, she meets a young woman in his house. Miranda automatically assumes that the woman is Bray's girlfriend. Heartbroken, she asks the woman to tell Bray that she came by to see him. However, when the girl learns that she's actually Miranda, she giggles in excitement. Elated, she clarifies that she's actually Bray's sister, Jennifer. Moving forward, Jennifer informs Miranda that Bray is actually at her house, back in Louisiana. Upon hearing this, Miranda immediately drives away and calls Bray. Thankfully, the latter picks up and clears the entire situation. In response, Miranda asks him out for coffee. Bray immediately agrees and soon, the two meet at a Waffle House. Once there, they express their feelings for one another and get closer than ever before. Miranda even musters up all the courage she has and kisses him passionately. Soon, months pass by and Christmas arrives. Bobby, Miranda, and all three of her kids seem to be at Bray's house. All of them decorate the entire place with several ornaments. Just then, Bray arrives with a magnificent pony as a Christmas gift for Bessie. The movie finally concludes with all of them having fun and celebrating Christmas as a family.